All right. So welcome. First of all, I want to say thank you to you, Porter. You had a long way to go to come to Berlin Web Week, and I saw on Facebook that you had a quite good time in Berlin because you lived in Berlin before.
Right.
Just before we really start into the discussion about entrepreneurship and what we discussed within the last few days here at Berlin Web Week, just give us a short story about your Berlin past.
Yeah, you know, I came to Berlin in January of '91. I was a student on an exchange program, and what drew me here was to be on the frontier of a place where there was so much change going on. And I guess I've always been attracted to being on the frontier, and the internet, of course, is one of the best, most exciting frontiers out there. And so, for me to come back and see the changes that have happened in Berlin, but also see that there's still this frontier culture here, especially in the internet, it's exciting. And to me, it's a sort of a startup paradise. I wish if I was starting over again, I'd come here and do an internet startup myself.
Yeah, you can do that now because you are not the VP of Alibaba.com anymore. So you're invited to come to Berlin and to start your company.
Great, thank you. Well, one other funny, the first time I was introduced to the internet was in Berlin. My classmate showed me email, and it's one of these things that should change your life, but at the time I said, oh, this is a total waste of time. So, had I realized in 1991 the internet would be this big, maybe I would have created Alibaba, but I was lucky to join Alibaba once Jack figured out the internet was going to change the world.
But you came here for a reason. Yesterday, Leverett Media invited you to do the director's premiere of your movie about a great entrepreneur, about Jack Ma, and about the company he has built, Alibaba. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, I think because Leverett has a community of entrepreneurs they work with, it made for a really exciting screening. Like for me, the venue was amazing, but more importantly, the people in the audience were all people involved in startups. And so for Leverett to organize this and bring all these people together around this film was really exciting for me. I put it in one of my top screenings of showing it anywhere in the world.
Wow. So, Sebastian, you are the one you invited Porter to come over with Leverett. What excited you about the movie? What excited you about Jack Ma?
I think the story about Alibaba is so interesting because it's almost unknown in Germany. Even if you talk to other founders in Germany about the topic, about Alibaba, of course they know it's something like eBay, but then it ends quite fast. And I mean, I would say 95% to 99% of all founders in Germany are thinking about their exit, and a couple of them are even dreaming about an IPO. And if there's probably going the biggest IPO ever on right now, it's very interesting to bring someone over who can give us much more insights about one of the most exciting projects that ever happened to the worldwide internet industry.
Yeah. Very interesting topic, Alibaba, right now, and very timely. So good timing that you invited Porter for Web Week. Another person being excited about Alibaba. You are also very excited about the topic.
Absolutely.
You traveled from the southern part of Germany to come here. So tell us what excites you about Alibaba and Jack Ma, and how are you involved with that?
Yeah. Well, we're using Alibaba at a university as a case study to teach global business and to teach, let's say, entrepreneurial globalization. And Jack Ma and Alibaba is especially amazing because he follows some very cardinal rules of entrepreneurship. So he is, whether or not intentionally, but he's a by-the-book entrepreneur, and they're getting rarer and rarer every year. So, like Sebastian said, you start looking at the exit, whereas Alibaba has always been for the long haul. So the motivation of Jack Ma is a very, very entrepreneurial one. Like you said, he's always in for the customer. He's not in for the exit or for the IPO, but he has a very clear focus and a very clear mission that makes him an ideal entrepreneur that's by the books. And the fact that he managed in China to run the first Chinese internet company and within 14 years made it to probably, as announced today, the biggest IPO in history, it's just amazing. And it's also amazing because it's been a very, very global company from the very beginning. So it shows that even with a very early global approach, it is possible to succeed. So Whereas 10 years ago, globalization was kind of a luxury problem for startups. Today, it's more and more becoming a necessity, so to say.
Yeah. Your film is called An Insider's View. So, if we say we are excited, we're looking from the outside, you have tremendous footage in there. You really look into Alibaba, old material. No idea how you got that material, but it's really exciting to see Jack Ma act directly in front of his employees and stuff like that. Can you give us some more insight about the personality of Jack Ma and what make him this awesome entrepreneur, this special kind of entrepreneur?
Yeah, sure. I mean, actually, one of the reasons I made the film is because it's such a great case study. And I sat down with Jack Ma before I left, and because he was a teacher, and even I was a teacher when I started my career, I think he understood that if you're an entrepreneur, you have a responsibility to sort of share the good and the bad of your experience with other entrepreneurs. So I think it's an interesting case study. And you mentioned that he's a by-the-book entrepreneur, which is very true, because one funny story is when we did a deal with Yahoo China, actually I tried to give him a book about Google so that he would understand search, how it would work, and he said, Porter, I don't want to look at that because it might bias my view on what we should do. So he's by the book because in some ways he doesn't read the books about it, he just does it by instinct. So his personality, I think the things that made Alibaba successful and helped him build the team were very, very innovative, and what that means sometimes is you have to break a successful model that works in order to make way for the next model. For example, if you're making a lot of money from one model, it's hard to give that up to go to the next model, but he was always willing to break that, take a cut in the revenues in order to make way for a longer term model. Another one, I mean, he would motivate the team as a leader, but it wasn't to chase him, the leader. It was to chase the overall dream and mission of the company. So I think that's one of the things he did is he aligned everyone to chase after the goal of the company, not just chase him as the boss. He's a very idealistic person who I think a lot of the great entrepreneurs, the reason they go so long as they can is because they don't focus just on making the quick money, and they look at what's the broader impact the company can have. And as a person, he was a very tough manager. He had high expectations. You would set a goal and he would triple it and then expect you to reach that goal. But we always surprised ourselves that we could actually achieve it. So yeah, he embodies all the sort of qualities that you see in any leading entrepreneur.
Yeah. Looking at the Berlin scene, a lot of people say it's not that serious. You just said he's a tough manager as well. So he has a vision, but he's also really a tough manager, making tough decisions. How do you see all this? You're working with a company, you're working with a lot of entrepreneurs, you help them to scale their business. What would you say are the most impressive entrepreneurs right now? What do they have in common?
I think it's a clear vision of making it successful that you have to. I mean, especially when you're having VC capital invested, when you're having the pressure to deliver. This makes you to deliver the best out of it and to do this every day. I wouldn't say that there are a lot of founders in Berlin that are like Jack Ma, who are so persistent with the idea. I mean, it took him quite long to make the company successful and to work so long on it, to make it bigger and bigger, and even to make money after such a while. You wouldn't have the chance in Germany right now to do business for such a long time without any revenues. I mean, therefore, I would say the most successful entrepreneurs in Germany, in Berlin right now, are the ones that are able to make money out of the company as soon as possible, to reach break even as early as possible. And yeah, I mean, the most positive thing is to make your investors happy, that you can work on the longer term. I think this is something that drives the most of them, but it's even the most critical part as well.
Pressure from investors is a good point. In your movie, it was very interesting that Jack Ma said his first priority is customers, second his employees, and third his investors. Sometimes in the Berlin scene you think that investors are first, so everything is made for the investors. Was it from the beginning that Jack Ma had the opportunity to act like that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the key insight that any entrepreneur should know with their business is basically, when we started with Alibaba in 2000, we realized that the investors expected a certain business model from these B2B companies. And we saw every leading B2B company chasing this expectation from the Wall Street analysts and investors. But we quickly realized this is not a model that customers want. And so we went strongly against that and pushed back. So I think the important thing for entrepreneurs to understand, the relationship between you and your investor is that you have to lead your investors. The investors don't lead you. Of course they're important, but you need to lead them. You know your business better, you know your customers better. And when they come to you with certain expectations, if you don't think it's in the best interest of the business in the long term, you have to push back and persuade them. And usually focusing on the customers rather than the investors means that you build something sustainable for the long term. But when companies start focusing on investors, they might get lucky and flip the company and have a big payday. But then after that, are you really proud of what you built if the company falls apart? So that was a key insight, is to push back and you lead your investors. I think the way Jack Ma said it is the CEO is the parent of the company and the investor is more like an uncle. Okay? Take their advice here and there. They're part of the team, but they're not in charge.
Looking at the role of money, there's also an interesting interview with Jack Ma quite early where he's asked, "Are you a millionaire?"
Right.
He says something very interesting. He says, "Well, I might be. It's on the way, but it's not his priority." Is that true? Was he driven by money, or what drives Jack Ma?
Well, yeah, no matter what, if you're an entrepreneur, especially if you're like in his case, he's now a billionaire, people are always a bit cynical if someone says, "Oh, I was never driven by money."
Yeah.
But if you think about it, he started his career as an English teacher. If you want to make a lot of money, especially in China, then you don't become an English teacher. So if you try to measure your self-worth and your impact on the society and the amount of money you're making as an English teacher, you're going to feel pretty much like a loser. I mean, the way an English teacher would measure his worth or value is how many students did he impact, or how many people went on to get inspired by his classes to go do something great. And I think he carried that with him all along. And there are plenty of entrepreneurs who chase money, who get rich and successful. But the more successful entrepreneurs out there, I think, are the ones that chase something that is more of a higher dream, and they measure their success on the impact they have on society. I think that's what drives it. But of course, if you ask anyone, would you like more money or less, people would usually say more. But that's a byproduct of the process. It's not the end goal.
Yeah. In your case studies, you not only did a case study on Jack Ma, but you also looked into other entrepreneurs, great business people.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would say that's completely different looking at Jack Ma to other people? Maybe you can give a comparison to
Absolutely. What we did in the case study, for example, is compare Jack Ma and his Alibaba business to Carlos Slim, the big investment mogul from Latin America. And you couldn't imagine a more substantial contrast than these two guys. Jack Ma is really the entrepreneur that came from nothing, and built an empire on his own in the business-to-business and business-to-consumer world. And Carlos Slim, same applies to other billionaires, investors from these continents. They're administrators. Okay? They're not driven by a mission or vision. All they do is they have a certain amount of assets and they're looking at ways to invest the money. Okay, so it's what's the return in 3 years, what's the return in 5 years. That makes them insanely successful. I mean, if you look at Carlos Slim and his wealth and his empire, this guy is so big that once in the 90s there was a rumor he had a heart attack. So the whole Mexican stock exchange collapsed by almost 8%. Just because one guy was rumored to have a heart attack. So it shows how powerful they can get. But I highly doubt that this gives a true meaning to a company. I doubt that this gives a meaning to his life's work. I believe that if he one day might die, his legacy is just going to fall apart, and the sons and uncles and daughters are going to fight over it, it's going to crumble. Whereas I believe that a company like Alibaba, whether or not Jack Ma is in place or not, it's going to continue because it's got a clear set of values, it's got a clear mission. And I think on the long run, this is something that defines an entrepreneurial firm, no matter how big it is.
If we look at what you said, what you just said, that it's more about administration, looking at Carlos Slim. In your movie, you show how Alibaba managed to basically defeat eBay in China. In the end, they left China. They literally left China. And you said it was quite easy for us to do that. You've been very close involved, so it was not only Jack Ma, you have been involved in that. Because you said you knew what they will do. They will play by the book. They are MBAs, and every MBA would play like they did.
Right.
Can you give us a little bit closer insight? What have you done to beat them?
To beat eBay?
To beat eBay, to win in this competition.
So, after we had our competition with eBay, I saw this article written by Malcolm Gladwell. It talks about how David beats Goliath. So we didn't study this, but the principles from this article basically said that if a smaller competitor wants to beat a bigger, more powerful competitor, sometimes you need to change the rules of the game. That doesn't mean change the ethics or the laws, but it just means change the way you approach it. So eBay was very predictable to us. They had a lot of money. They were led by MBAs. I'm an MBA myself, so I can criticize them. They followed very predictable strategies. But we thought, okay, how can we use eBay's strength against them? So while they were investing hundreds of, tens of millions of dollars in advertising, we found ways to engage them in a public PR battle, so that every dollar they spent on advertising, we were using to fuel traffic to our website. And then when they tried to lock us out of certain website advertising by doing exclusive deals, we went and got TV advertisements on the national TV and did outdoor ads. That helped us build a lot of credibility, and we were able to get it at a better price than they were paying. So we looked at it like, we actually at that point publicly, very aggressively attacked them in the same way maybe Apple attacked Microsoft with their 1984 ad. And it led to this buzz about e-commerce, and we sort of used their own strength against them. And so sometimes an entrepreneur can't just follow the MBA framework. They should understand the MBA framework, use it if it works, but other times take a totally different way of looking at it, and it's an easier way to compete against a bigger competitor.
Yeah. Looking at we want to provide value to entrepreneurs with this discussion, and I often think that there's a lot of knowledge published about how to start a company. There are programs to start a company, but there's not that much knowledge and not that much discussion about growing a company, growing your startup, and that's why I like the insight. And Sebastian, you are very much into growing startups, helping startups to grow their business. What do you see as major strategy in our times you have to take to grow your business, maybe to do some growth happening, and can we learn from what have you done in 10 years ago now, basically? Yeah.
I mean, what we are seeing every day is, of course, you need a proof of concept that your business model is working, that you can make money out of it, but you even will be fine with generating some growth with pure CPO or media for revenue deals, to have good income, probably with Google and Facebook. But of course, in the end, you're always paying for scaling your business. There are only a couple of companies that have such a product that was so good manageable just by a viral campaign or just because it's so hip and so in. So what we are seeing in the end, you really have to look for the channels that are working the best for your company and how you can reach your target group in the best way possible. And I think the time is over where you had a product that was interesting, important for everyone, especially now the founders. What you can see in Berlin as well is all the businesses are going much closer into a niche and are looking for something where they can differentiate against the big companies that grew in the first generation of the startups. And therefore I think it's in some way much harder to scale your business right now because there's so much more competition, because I would say the startups, the companies from 10 years, 15 years ago, they are now the big companies you were fighting 10, 15 years ago, and therefore there's no other way besides spending some intelligent money on marketing campaigns and scaling your business on this way.
I know from my own experience working for Web.de, quite a successful German portal, they also scaled their business they were one of the first to do TV advertising. And I think you in the movie showed as well that you had to scale down your advertising budgets in bad times, but as soon as you had money, you started to invest in growth. I think you invested for years in growth without earning any money.
Right. Yeah, for us, I mean, so when I joined Alibaba, we were doing something which I wouldn't recommend, which was we were just burning a lot of money, but not very strategically on advertising, because we were trying to do a big global business. So we cut that then, and we thought about what's our best way to advertise. So then we were very strategic about it. So what we found is that internet companies, on the one hand, can grow virally, but every now and then you need a big boost of credibility. So we did a global TV advertising campaign where you then, when people see something on TV, it increases the credibility a lot. It's almost more like a PR effect than advertising. And then with our battle with Taobao versus eBay in China, eBay had always thought that you should just grow virally or through some online ads. But we thought, okay, in China, in the China market, there's some unique situations where it makes sense. So we went out and did the opposite. We actually went out and did a lot of TV ads and a lot of outdoor advertising as a way to complement our online growth, to make people trust the website more, to do e-commerce. So the thing not to do is just get a bunch of money and just start spending it with wild abandon. It's being very strategic and doing bursts of advertising at the right time, and then when you reach bigger scale, it can become a more steady thing.
So it's a combination between doing push with using media on the one hand, but also having a good story. So it's a storytelling approach in a way.
Yeah, it has to be all integrated. Like your advertising should support your PR, and your PR should support everything. So it all needs to be considered together and integrated and very strategic.
What other growth hacks would you recommend for a startup company? Maybe you looked in your case study a little bit closer. What were things you saw from the outside? Maybe you can confirm it or give another angle to it. What have you seen that Alibaba did that helped them grow tremendously?
I think what Sebastian just said or mentioned briefly is that entrepreneurs will focus on certain niches is something very, very crucial. There's just been a new study from Dublin that shows that if you look at growth strategies that also big companies apply, 90% of them fail straight away. So the question is why? And there's a growth paradox to be identified, and it's every step that you take away from the core of your business is a step towards failure. So the idea to just slander around and grow somewhere is the imminent failure. So what you need as a startup, the same applies for a big company, a very, very strong core business. And I think this is something that Alibaba had with their spirit from the very beginning. They were focusing on trade. Alibaba is in some way the essence of the Chinese trade mentality. This is the core of Alibaba, I believe. And then they grew select areas around it that always revolved around the trade from China with the world. And you need this core business, and you need to well establish it before you can grow it. Because otherwise the risk is that you will just mangle into different businesses and eventually collapse under your own weight. Because as Sebastian said, if you look at strategic marketing channels, you need the product and you need the right channel. So the channel alone doesn't help you, the product alone doesn't help you. The mixture of a strong core business and the right marketing campaigns is probably the 10% of growth strategy that will be successful eventually.
On the market way, did you really look into certain verticals that were very successful and helped the marketplace a lot?
Yeah, we did. I mean, for example, we identified on the Alibaba B2B marketplace, which is a sort of global trade marketplace for importers and exporters, we realized certain products did much better online than others. So like commodities didn't really sell well, but other things, textiles or electronics or things that changed quite a bit, like fashion. So then we would just pick those verticals, and then we attended trade shows all around the world. We came to Germany quite a bit because so many trade shows are here. So that's how we focus, is on picking certain things and emphasizing those that were better suited for online trade.
Yeah. Another thing you emphasize about growth in the movie, but growth is not like this. So it's not just going up. You had very hard times with Alibaba, and you said in a way always it went up and it definitely always went down again. And as an entrepreneur, you have to have the courage to go through this. And I think you have an awesome story about you and Jack Ma in Berlin that shows a little bit through what kind of ups and downs you have to go in such a world. Maybe you share a story with us and give us a little bit more information about his character and how he managed to do the up and down.
Right, yeah. So, we came to Berlin in 2000 at the sort of peak of internet wild times then. And Jack was set to give a speech at the Internet World in Berlin. And we thought, okay, we're leading this revolution, so we can't wait to meet our fellow revolutionaries. And we went to the venue, had about 500 seats, and there were about 3 people there for Jack's speech. And it was funny because, clearly that's disappointing. You're expecting this big crowd, and really no one cared about Alibaba at all. But Jack went and he gave his 45-minute speech at that time. And then he made a joke to me when we left. He said, next time we come back to Berlin, this place will be totally full. And I think it's just, when in the face of a challenge or a disappointment, it's about doubling down and just being resilient. Resiliency is one of the most important traits for an entrepreneur. It's realizing that, not taking a chance is the biggest failure, and that falling down is part of the process. Of course, you never set out to fall down. There's never an excuse. But Jack used to say to me, he would say, Porter, I will criticize you for, I won't criticize you if you make a mistake, but I'll criticize you for doing nothing. And it's just part of the process of going through. So being resilient, not taking yourself too seriously, and realizing even if that business fails, you still have another chance. I mean, Jack Ma had another business like Alibaba that failed before Alibaba. So that's just an important trait of any entrepreneur.
I really like the early footage in your movie about Jack talking to government officials that they did not even get the internet, and how he went on and on and on to work with the government in China to get his business started. And he failed with this business.
Yes, from time to time you get people who think, oh, Alibaba must have beaten eBay because of government political reasons or something. Actually, the government was a headwind the whole way. We had to educate the government on why e-commerce was important. And he just kept knocking on doors, get turned away, but over time, the government began to see e-commerce was providing benefits to China.
Sebastian, you started your company as well. You started Leverage as a startup. What were things that you had in the last 2 years that were challenging for you, that you thought, oh, this might be very hard, that an entrepreneur has to go through?
Yeah. I think in the first stage, it's always to understand how it all works to set up a company, what you have to do, what kind of regulations by the government you have to think about, how does it work with tax and legal questions, what do you need for founding a company. I mean, in Germany you have to bring 25,000 euro for founding a GmbH. This is the most safest entity form for the most founders. And of course you have to get it all together. You need normally some investors to back you up, to bring you over the first period until you make money. So there are a lot of different things that you have to consider, and I think there is in some ways a good comparison to a company like Alibaba. I mean, that managed the company in the beginning from an apartment, and therefore I would say there are so many things that you have to consider, and it's definitely not something for everyone to found a company, because you really have to follow your idea and you really have to become successful with it, and therefore in the end there's so many challenges and you have to accept them all and always see them as opportunities and push it forward.
Pushing it forward, Jack Ma in your movie says that you really have to work long hours and how crazy it will be within the next 3 years, and I think you went through that through the last year, and you've got a further journey in front of you. But what you also said, we just discussed it before this discussion, that he was also quite unreasonable. So very early on he said that he has a really very ambitious goal. Maybe you share some of the insight you had there.
Yeah, so when I first joined Alibaba, it actually, Jack would get up at every meeting and say that he wanted Alibaba to be one of the top 10 websites in the world, that he wanted the company to last for 80 years. He later expanded it to 103 years, because 80 years wasn't long enough. And then he also wanted to be a company that served all business people in the world. And so these kind of crazy ideas, they seemed crazy then, and maybe 99 out of 100 people making these kind of bold claims, you know, it didn't end up doing it. But you can't achieve amazing, great things if you don't set that as the goal. Very seldom does someone just luck into that. And so by setting these goals and having the team chase those goals and visualize it and set people's sights on this 100-year journey instead of just for a few years, then I think that's what makes a great company. If you don't strive for that, you're very seldom going to actually reach that.
From your studies, what drives those super entrepreneurs to make those unreasonable claims and then to realize them? What do you think, looking at several entrepreneurs, what drives them, and maybe what's special about Jack Ma?
Well, in terms of what drives them, in terms of motivation, it's a whole portfolio of different aspects. I think every entrepreneur has his very own, let's say, agenda in terms of what drives him, what makes him do these steps. What they all have in common, though, and this is exactly what Porter just said, is this almost blatant ignorance for reality. Let's call it that way, okay? If you listen to the claims and if you hear what they say from an MBA perspective, from a strategy perspective, like, this is not going to happen. But then you see this spark in their eyes and you see they mean it. Okay, so it's again, it breaks down to resilience, it breaks down to really believing in this mission that you have there. And eventually, you mentioned this visualization just now. You really have to see yourself in that position. It's not enough to just sit there and claim that, okay, I'm gonna be the next Facebook, I'm gonna be the next Twitter or whatever, and have $1 billion on my bank. You really have to visualize it for yourself, and you have to communicate that to your team so they can visualize it too and really go for it. As long as you just blur it out, it's not gonna happen. So it's this mix of resilience and really visualizing it for the team, for yourself, that eventually gets you the upper hand, I guess.
Well, they always talk about Steve Jobs had this reality distortion field. You know, like partners would meet with him and he would somehow take them from thinking something was impossible to believing it was possible. And that's what entrepreneurs who really believe what they're doing can do. Because if you just look at all the things that can go wrong and get bogged down in that, you'll never achieve anything. So only entrepreneurs push things to the next level. By definition, you are changing the way things are done. and you almost have to suspend belief in reality in order to get there sometimes.
Yeah. How important, and lately I've heard a lot of entrepreneurs talking about goals beyond just earning money and market capitalization. So they talk about how many jobs they created. They think about their country. Even Oliver Samwer, one of the most successful entrepreneurs in Germany, is starting to refer to how many jobs he created, about history, about how he wants to improve e-commerce in a way. Looking at this, has this been important for Jack Ma right from the beginning? How do you see that? How do you see it in the future, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that, when Taobao was started, we could have easily started making money. Jack had a rule for the guy who was heading Taobao then. He said, I will, punish you on your performance review if you make over this much money. Jack set the target as he wanted a certain number of entrepreneurs to be making money on Taobao. And so the KPI for the manager was how many people are earning enough money on Taobao to make a living for themselves. And because, I think that it's important. Also, of course it's important, not in a cynical way, but in China or any country, to present yourself of what the benefits you're providing to society, to the community, because in e-commerce there's so many ways it's helping people, and it's smart as a strategy, but it's also smart as a part of your public image to highlight all these benefits you're bringing.
And maybe it helps to be more resilient. So that you say, all right, we are doing more than just building a company. We're really helping, and that's something that might help.
Well, and it inspires you. It inspires your team. Yesterday at the screening in Berlin, a guy came up to me and he said, he was from Turkey, and he said his cousin was in Turkey and was confined to a wheelchair and was even missing some of his fingers, so he couldn't work very easily. But he uses Alibaba for trading, so he'll buy things from a certain market, sell to another, and makes about $2,000 a month. These are the things that push you forward as an entrepreneur when you see the benefits, and it makes you more resilient, because you think to yourself, well, if our company fails, it's not just us, but all the people depending on it as well.
Yeah. Do you see this in the Berlin startup scene growing as well, that there are people who say, we are very much focused, we really want to do better customer service, we really want to change something? Or is it more what a lot of people say, more short-sighted? A lot of people say, Berlin is not that serious. How do you see that?
I think it always depends on the stage of the company. I mean, Berlin has definitely a big problem in raising capital, let's say between 2 and 5 or 10 million or even higher. So most of the companies, they are still real startups. They are still facing the problems of scaling themselves, of bringing them into a position where you can think more clearly, much more freer, without having your investor besides you every 2 minutes, and to focus those things as well. I would say, of course, the most companies now, they definitely have to think about customer service and making their customers happy, and of course having motivated employees, so that it all fits together. But in the end, I think in Berlin it's mostly the key to make your company successful. The most founders understood that they have to deliver a good product, and that to a good product they definitely have to be happy employees, that they think they have a safe job, that they are happy that they are acceptable paid. So in the end it all comes together, but I wouldn't say that they are so focused on that like Jack Ma was and probably is. So I think in Berlin, when you say you don't make more money than this, otherwise you get your performance lower, it wouldn't work. And to be honest, I wouldn't do the same. So I would say it's much shorter orientated than Alibaba was. But of course, if you think about the numbers in capital that Alibaba raised, it's a total different dimension than 95% of all German startups ever get to.
It's been a killer move that you brought in money, for example, from Yahoo, I think, that helped you a lot to grow your business. Is that correct?
Yeah, it helped. I mean, the big thing that really launched the company was well, first Goldman Sachs, but then SoftBank came in with a big investment. Then Jack Ma and Masayoshi's son have a similar worldview. The Yahoo, at that point it helped, but we didn't actually need the money. It just helped because it put us on the radar as part of this big deal. I think in the long run, the Yahoo investment turned out to be more of a detraction from the business than actual help. But having investors that kind of believed in the long term as well was important.
And Marissa Mayer is quite happy now with the investment that has been done by Yahoo.
Yeah, you know, right after the Yahoo deal, I remember an interesting story is that the COO, I shouldn't say, I don't mind saying. So, ultimately starting. So,
that's a good thing.
Yeah. I won't say who, but so. Yeah, right after the Yahoo investment, I remember something funny. We had the Yahoo senior managers come over to an event for Alibaba, and one of the senior managers was there from Yahoo, and Jack made a joke to this guy. He said, yeah, someday we'll buy Yahoo. And then he looked at Jack, and I can even say a little bit condescending, he said, well, last I checked, you guys were worth $4 billion, and Yahoo is worth $40 billion, so I don't think that's going to happen. Well, now it's flipped where, you know, Alibaba is probably worth 5-6 times Yahoo. So I think they're probably happy with their investment now.
Yeah. A good point to discuss very current things happening right now with Alibaba. Just yesterday we got the news that it's really going to happen. Alibaba will go to the US stock exchange. What's your opinion about it? Are you proud? How do you see that?
Yeah, I think it's exciting because on the one hand I'm not surprised. I mean, when I left Alibaba in 2008, I kind of knew this day would come. It's just the rest of the world, because they weren't so close to the story, didn't see it coming. So it's been fun for me to watch, and because I always felt once we had beaten eBay, it was an open playing field for Alibaba to grow and build the company, and it was theirs to lose. If Alibaba didn't become the biggest e-commerce company in the world, it's because they squandered a great opportunity. So now it's fun to see that it's actually finally happening, and the world is sort of waking up to this. They're waking up to the fact that Chinese entrepreneurs can be just as innovative as anyone. So it'll be important for the company, obviously, because now they're thrust into this public spotlight all around the world. Everyone's going to be paying attention. They have a history of sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You know, there could be an issue like with Facebook, where right after their IPO, they went from the star of you know, the world media to suddenly everyone was coming and attacking them. So that can always happen for a startup, but they've been through enough up and down cycles. I think they have the strength, and the employees are prepared to weather the storm.
Yeah. Whenever somebody discusses Alibaba doing their second IPO, basically, you've been involved in the IPO in Hong Kong before. It's always a discussion about China versus the US versus Europe. What's your view on what kind of sign is it to the market? What's happening in the market now that Alibaba will very likely be the largest IPO ever? So not only within the tech sector, but all over it will be likely. We don't know the price yet, but it will be likely the largest IPO ever.
The IPO of Alibaba, I think there's 3 aspects I'd like to mention. For the first one, of course, it got this kind of lighthouse effect. I think it finally gives the Chinese e-commerce or the Chinese internet industry the leverage and the credibility it needed. I think that it shows that they finally arrived at the spot where they belong, and this is the global market, and they can easily play along with Silicon Valley and others. Secondly, there's 2 words of warning I'd almost like to spread out to that. And the first one is why Jack Ma took the New York Stock Exchange. I mean, there's been almost 2 years of debate whether they're going to launch in Hong Kong or New York. And they eventually had to choose New York because Hong Kong refused the ownership structure that Jack Ma intended after the IPO. That means not all shares are going to have the same vote. So Jack Ma wanted to reserve for himself kind of the control minority over the company, and Hong Kong refused that. So they're stuck with New York, which is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, of course, it gives them this mass attention because now it's a Chinese IPO in New York. So this is an outstandingly good thing. But the downside to that is now they're in a different focus because before they were mainland China, they were operating in China and they were extremely successful there. And they were judged by, let's say, Chinese comparison. Whereas now when they're listed in New York, the question is, well, how is your international business set up? And how transparent is your business in China, and where's the real cash and value coming in? So by getting this exposure, they're going to gain a whole lot of credibility, but at the same time, I think they have to live up to that. So I remember from your film that Meg Whitman said, if we want to win the internet business, the battle is going to be decided in China, and they lost. and to some extent, I believe that now it's vice versa for Alibaba. If they want to win the global market, they have to move out of China and get their victory outside of China on other battlefields, and that's going to be Europe and that's going to be the US. They're off to an excellent start, but I think the final victory has to be achieved and proven outside of China for Alibaba.
So your thesis is they will definitely use the money, they will use their power to enter Europe and the US.
That is currently my expectation. Yes.
How do you see
Correct me if I'm wrong, Porter.
I think you're partially right on that. Like I think in their prospectus, I haven't read through the whole thing, but I think they say that China will be their focus in the short, medium term, because in China there's just so much they can do. And they've learned from eBay's mistake that you don't just go to another market that's totally different and try to replicate it. I think everything you said is right, though, that now they're going to be in the global spotlight. They're going to be judged and measured by global standards. They're also facing a challenge of being a Chinese company where you're almost guilty till proven innocent in a lot of cases because of the image that Chinese business people have. And there are plenty of people internationally who want to stoke that because some people see Alibaba or China's rise as a threat. Basically, I think what people should do, especially companies, is should embrace it. I mean, you have the world's largest shopping mall now, and German companies can go sell products on there, or US companies can sell products on there. So there will be some people who fear this and will want to attack Alibaba, and then there will be other people who view it as the opportunity it is. I think they'll focus on China and then look at ways to go international, but it'll be more as an investor that empowers the local entrepreneurs rather than coming into Germany and trying to win the German market in the face of great local competition.
Speculating about Alibaba is fascinating. We want to deliver value to entrepreneurs in this discussion. Let's talk about markets a little bit more, looking at startups right now that might think about going to China, going to the US. You've just been on a scouting mission in Asia, not in China, but other areas of Asia, for some of your customers to scout opportunities there. What have you seen there? What do you find interesting now about Asia for German startups, basically?
I mean, of course, German startups, they're having quite a big market within Germany, Switzerland, Austria, so the German-speaking region. It's quite good to have an excellent proof of concept, to make yourself big, to gain significant revenue. But after that, of course, you're looking for new markets. Of course, there's France, there's the UK, there are the neighbors of Germany, but you can manage them quite well from Germany. In the end, we're having a lot of customers at the moment that are thinking about expanding their business even further. So there's then the questions, are we going to the US, where it's extremely competitive, where so many great ideas, where there's enough money available to scale more or less everything. So it's quite easy to find an investor that supports a successful business model. So Asia is for us quite an interesting market, especially Southeast Asia, with the richer countries like Singapore, Malaysia, and the extremely fast-growing Indonesia, where we're thinking about with a couple of companies going there and opening up the market for them. Of course, what you said before is completely right, that the product, that the idea has to work in this country as well, is quite a long evaluation process, and you have to adapt the habits and all the needs from your customers in this market. And this is something where we are going very, very carefully over with our clients and looking for the opportunities and discussing with all the media companies, with all the partners that we are working with, if this idea really makes sense and if we can scale them and evaluate how the competition and the probable outcome will be.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I mean, I think one of the things I talk about when I show the film in different countries, and I'm sure Berlin, Germany is already like this, but is so many times entrepreneurs define their market as their local market. And they think, okay, we want to be the eBay of Germany, or we want, but at this point, and Alibaba has proven this, you can build a global company from anywhere. And Berlin, Germany has all the essential ingredients to build global internet companies, global apps. And so it's important for people not to just think in terms of winning the German-speaking region. It's building something for a global model. And if you don't see examples around you in your industry that are doing this, then be that example. Be the first one. Don't try and wait until someone else paves the way. You can pave the way, and then people will be talking about the local company from Berlin the same way they're talking about Alibaba right now.
Let's talk specifically about China. You just said Southeast Asia, very interesting, easier to go there than to China. Once again, Oliver Sommer famously said, I'm going everywhere, but not to China because Jack Ma is not waiting for anybody. Within his business model, that's quite clear. You basically, yesterday, you encouraged people to go to China because you think it's doable. Just give us some insight about China specifically.
Yeah, well, I think it's doable. I do think for people who are starting their career, like yesterday as we were discussing, it's a great place to go, get a great skill. But too many times internet companies come from outside of China. They think they have a very sophisticated, great platform, and they can just take it to China. But there are, for every one company in Germany or the US that's trying a certain model, there's probably 100 in China. Because there's students in dormitories, in small apartments all around China trying to build it, and it's a very scrappy, aggressive, entrepreneurial environment. So I've seen so many times people come in thinking no problem. But for people who want to go into China, there's certainly a lot of opportunity, but the first thing people should do is understand and respect the local entrepreneurs and what they're doing, try to understand them, and then find the opportunity rather than come in expecting to have a really easy walk in China.
Yeah, you discussed a lot of MBAs that are going to those countries, and you think it's very often not the right approach to have this MBA approach and to go into China.
Well, yeah, I think I have an MBA, and Alibaba. When I started, I used to always try to play down the fact I had an MBA, and Jack Ma would tease me. So when I would give a presentation, I would be sure not to use a SWOT analysis and all these frameworks. I would just talk from the heart, because that's the way he makes decisions. As the company grew, we started hiring more MBAs. It made more sense. But I think what so many times I've seen happen, it's happened with eBay in China, and you could argue it's happening with certain business models in developing countries. People boast about having the former McKinsey guy or the Harvard Business School guy, and they take this team and go put them right on a market that they don't understand. I was in Nigeria working on a project for a month, and we were competing against a company like that. So for me, eBay would never have hired Jack Ma and the co-founders of Alibaba. They never would have chosen them as their management team. They chose people that they related to, but didn't choose people the customers related to. And so that's what I mean. It's just respecting the local entrepreneurs. They may seem quirky, they may seem to do things wrong or different, but they understand the local market, and bringing in your framework from Germany or the US is never going to be a great recipe for long-term success.
Yeah. And this is a very important thing in both directions. You look a lot into the other side, Chinese companies coming to Germany. Can you share some thoughts about that? What's happening there? How do the Chinese address the German market or the European market?
it's amazing to see what is going on in terms of investment from China and in Germany. I would say all Europe, but particularly Germany right now. They invest almost. It's just amazing. You know, they don't buy a single company. They buy whole industrial complexes. They buy territories. They buy company conglomerates. Mostly driven by Chinese government funds that are heavily and strategically investing in Germany, and so far mostly established companies. So they have certain key technologies where they're investing. So if it's within this framework of this key technology, we're going to buy the company. The next thing that might come up, that we possibly see first indicators, is for the Chinese to invest in startups as well. So while so far business angels, correct me if I'm wrong, venture capitals are focused from the US, maybe some Switzerland, a bit from the UK. The next wave we could see is actually from China coming over. Jack Ma started this. Jack Ma started investing very early on in Silicon Valley. He started to buy certain companies. And maybe with the focus on entrepreneurs now, what made these companies special, the ones Jack Ma bought, is that they delivered a very, very certain value to his company. And it was primarily focused on sales operation and sales logistics. So anything that could provide additional value to a Japanese company's value chain might be of special focus for these investors. So they're taking a very, very strategic approach. They have a certain agenda, and if you fit this agenda, there's a potentially good chance that you get in touch with them. So they're not investing at random, even though it may appear at the very, very first sight, but they have a certain agenda. And I wouldn't be surprised to see Chinese investors in the startup environment in Germany pretty soon.
Yeah, traditionally quite. Last question. Will we see Chinese investment all over the world, internet investment, startup investment? Can we expect a new wave of investments from China?
I think so. You know, when I was in Nigeria, I had nothing to do at night, so I turned on the TV and I saw Tencent was advertising its WeChat services in Nigeria. I think you'll see more and more companies doing investment overseas for complementary businesses. And just as eBay and Amazon when expanding around the world, there's no reason to think that a company like Alibaba wouldn't do the same. But I think they've learned the lessons from these other companies that you need to win your local market first before you start really moving into other markets.
So thank you very much for coming to Berlin Web Week, visiting Leverett. Thank you, Leverett, for being the host of the whole event, visiting our group here. And I'm looking forward to have another discussion like this in the future soon. Thank you very much for coming over from Southern Germany and adding the more academic angle on our discussion. Awesome discussion. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been great.